Hi, I'm Ryan from Monster Logo Studios. If you've been following my channel this year, you've seen a lot of musical ideas in various stages of maturity across a number of devices, and you may be wondering why none of them have been completed and packaged for any kind of formal release or distribution. The reason I haven't spent too much time developing them is because I've been wrapping up production of our third album with my band Barricades at night. Between life and our day jobs, it's taken us 5 years to finish this record, but it's finally been submitted for distribution, and I wanted to share my current list of favorite plugins coming out of that process, some of which are essential to our workflow. As a reminder, this isn't a sponsored video. I don't make any money if you purchase any of these, but I'll put direct links to the manufacturer sites below in case you hear something you like. I'm also not going to make these exhaustive deep dives, just a quick demo so you can hear both in the mix and in isolation, basic A/B comparison stuff. Now, before I jump in, let me explain a little bit about our process. I've been using DAWs or digital audio workstations for over 20 years, and until recently spent most of my time working inside the box. Barricades at Night is primarily a two-piece. I do most of the music, and my hetero life mate Justin handles all of the lyrics and vocals. Because we both have day jobs and families and other hobbies, keeping our workflow as streamlined and efficient as possible is critical to making this all possible. With the exception of the last two records, where we recruited Travis Orban of Darkest Hour for drums, we do everything ourselves. All of the recording, programming, producing, mixing, and mastering is done right here on my laptop in my home studio. And because of that, I'm constantly hunting for new tools to make it easier or quicker to go from idea to album. With that, here are 10 plugins that were essential in producing our latest album, Growing Fear. To make this easier to navigate, I'm going to group by brand, starting with Kuassa. Kuassa is an Indonesian company that makes a broad spectrum of very affordable but high-quality guitar-focused plugins. Since our second self-titled record, I've been using their amp sims almost exclusively. This isn't a decision driven by cost sensitivity. I own most of the other big names in both the software and hardware guitar sim realms, but I genuinely prefer Kuassa's products to most of them. They offer both standalone and plug-in versions of most of their products, and about a year ago introduced their Ampflikation 360 platform to integrate all of them. For a long time, their Ampflikation Vermilion plugin, which is a vintage combo amp sim, was my go-to on guitar, and I still use their caliber and bass amp sim on 90% of the tracks I record. In Vermilion, Amp B with the overdrive engaged is such a versatile platform. I can throw a fuzz or an overdrive pedal in front of it when I need a little extra dirt, but turning this thing up to 11 just sounds incredible, and requires very little tweaking during the mix process. This is track 12, called Precision. On this chorus, I have 4 different guitar tracks. They were all recorded with a Stratocaster, and most of them are using the bridge pickup, but I have the Vermilion plugin on everything, and I'm getting a pretty wide range of tones. There's a bus reverb that's panning each channel to the opposite side, but that's it. The compressor's turned off, this is just the amp, and a delay on that one lead track. Effects are something else Kuassa does well. I probably use their distortion effects more than anything. The Fuzz in particular is one of my favorites. There are a bunch of styles built into this little box, and it works just as well for bass as it does for guitar. Having the mix knob is a huge benefit because I can crank the gain, then cut the mix back to allow some of that clean pick attack to still cut through. This is track 5, a song called Pretty Things. This song ends with what we colloquially refer to as a third movement. There's a big crescendo, and I have 3 guitars that are all harmonizing. This is just the fuzz effect going into the Vermilion amp sim. Turning off the fuzz, you can hear that the amp is clean. All of that saturation is coming from the fuzz pedal. With so much else going on in the mix, the fuzz really helps these three melodies cut through. Last from Kuassa, their line of studio effects are fantastic. And while I've recently started integrating some of their EQs into my bus channels, their Kratos 2 maximizer has been used on every song I've mastered in the last 8 years. It's intuitively laid out and has a unique take on the look-ahead feature by way of the texture knob, but at the end of the day, it's an easy-to-use and low-overhead limiter. Here's the mastering project from Growing Fear. I like to bounce all of the projects individually, then master them in a single session. It allows me to work out the track transitions and overall album dynamics by hearing all of the songs relative to one another. Let's look at track 2, Never Know.
Won't you spend a little time with me before I have to go? I'll spend a little time with you.
At most, I'm only hitting about a couple dB of gain reduction, but it's doing enough. I'm not using the dithering, I've got the oversampling turned up, and then I played with the attack time individually on each song to align with the tempo. It's a cheap, easy to use, what you see is what you get limiter. This shouldn't be a surprising entry on the list. Anyone who's had to mix and layer vocals has probably used Soundtoys' little AlterBoy at some point, or at many points. It's an easy-to-use pitch shifter that epitomizes what you see is what you get. I've explored adding it to a guitar or other instruments, but really this thing shines on the human instrument. Justin, who sings for Barricades, loves layering octaves to thicken the main vocal line, and that's usually where I'm deploying this particular tool, taking that layering up another notch without it sounding cartoony as some pitch shifters can. This is the opening track, Hold On. I have a few layered vocals during the verse, one of them being this higher falsetto sounding octave.
Others can grow and others are cast. Others can grow and others are cast.
Our singer Justin actually has a great falsetto voice, but what I've found is it often has a hard time cutting through the mix. You could apply some saturation or a few EQ hacks, but what I did here was have him sing an octave lower, then use this little AlterBoy to pitch it up.
Others can grow and others are cast. Others can grow and others are cast. In the ones we lose the grips of death, I'll hold on. In the ones we lose the grips of death, I'll hold on.
It's not perfect, but it sounds natural enough in the context of the mix. It works really well.
In the ones we lose the grips of death, I'll hold on.
Another one of my favorite vocal plugins is the Waves Reel ADT. Until this last record, I was effectively recreating this effect manually. The ADT, or artificial double tracking effect, is a great way to make your vocals pop, especially when you're dealing with a big wide wall of rock guitars and a thin single vocal melody. It works much like a chorus effect, allowing you to control pitch and delay variations to a parallel signal. I've also done this the manual way, but then you end up fighting syllable alignment and phasing issues, which results in a lot of automation. At the end of the day, the ADT plugin sounds fantastic. It allows a lot of musical control over the doubled signal, and more importantly, it saves me a lot of time. This is track 11, The Harvestman. We actually just released a music video for this one, and I'll link that in the description. But on the chorus, we have 3 vocal tracks, a doubled main melody, and then a single harmony track.
In the cellar of the past, the very few things that last, there's no way left to defend the harvestman.
When we initially recorded this, the single harmony stood out well against the doubled melodies, at least on headphones. But once I started mixing, I realized it needed a little bit more. In comes the Reel ADT plugin to save it. It adds a bit of stereo width and some doubling to make it sound like we double tracked it and give it a bit more body against the melody.
In the cellar of the past, the very few things that last, there's no way left to defend the harvestman. In the cellar of the past, the very few things that last, there's no way left to defend.
It's also competing against this center guitar part, which in retrospect I probably should have panned a little bit, but again, the stereo spread provided by the ADT plugin makes room for everyone, and they all get along a bit better in the context of the mix. On the last record, I used the Butch vocal plugin on every single vocal track, and that's not an exaggeration. I've upgraded both my primary vocal microphone and my interface since then, and have subsequently rewired my standard vocal channel strip, but I still rely on the Butch plugin for more aggressive sounds. The digital and tube distortion algorithms are tuned to work well with human voice, and the built-in EQ and de-essing features are also perfectly tuned. Each knob reacts exactly how you'd expect, and this is definitely one of the best executed catch-all plugins I've used. The interface isn't my favorite, but the tones speak for themselves. I can't recommend this one enough. This is a song called Means No Harm. It's a very aggressive and upbeat track, and we wanted the vocals to fit in. I have 2 vocal tracks, one clean with a lot of compression, one dirty with just the Butch vocal plugin.
The clock is armed, it means no harm, it still imposes its will. The clock is armed, I've lost my charm, feeling over the hill. The clock is armed, sounds the alarm when I'm feeling. The clock is armed, it means no harm, it still imposes its will. The clock is armed, I've lost my
I'm using the de-esser and a lot of compression, but the input gain is lowered, so it's only doing about 5 dB of gain reduction. I'm using a little high cut to make it less of an ice pick, but I've really focused the saturation EQ on the mid-range, using the separate low cut and high cut filters.
The clock is armed, it means no harm, it still imposes its will. The clock is armed, I've lost my The clock is armed, it means no harm, it still imposes its will. The clock is armed, I've lost my The clock is armed, it means no harm, it still imposes its will. The clock is armed, I've lost my The clock is.
This is maybe not the most versatile example of what the Butch plugin can do, but it definitely excels at these gritty vocal effects. Another new tool for this record was Wave's Abbey Road mastering plugin. Like the Butch vocal plugin, this is another very well executed multi-effect, if you can call it that. There are 5 modules that can be rearranged in any order: an input, tone, compressor limiter, filter, and combined spread output module. I've always done my own mastering, and before implementing this into my workflow, I had a fairly complex mastering chain where I was constantly juggling adjustments across something like 10 different plugins. This replaces all of them, except for the aforementioned Kratos 2 maximizer, which I still use for final 16-bit dithering and adjustments to the output ceiling. There are a ton of very usable presets included out of the box, and I have a collection of favorites that I almost always start from and then adjust to taste. Like most things in the mastering realm, this isn't intended to make dramatic changes, but it's great at adding that final layer of polish and enhancing whatever character your song has coming in. The original compressor mode sounds very good to my ears and has just the right amount of analog dirt. It helps make the final track sound a bit more organic and less like the sterile computational output that can sometimes result from doing everything in the box. Back to the mastering project, let's look at track 10, The Rabbit. I'm using all 4 modules here, adjusting the input gain to taste, and then tweaking the EQ to some extent, really just trying to bring out some of those high frequency harmonics.
Trying to provide protected partake. Nothing could survive the snare you stay. I hope to die. My heart across, not lost for good. The good I lost, the good I lost.
In fact, other than a few minor adjustments, this is mostly the out-of-the-box Rocking 2 preset by Jaquire King, who worked that big Modest Mouse record from 2004 and a bunch of other stuff. I really love this plugin. I haven't really seen this one talked about much, and it's felt like my own little dirty secret for a long time. I've been sneaking this into my guitar tracks for several records now, and it makes a few key appearances on this one. As a guitar player, one of the things I miss when plugging directly into an interface is the interplay between the guitar and the sound coming through the monitors. Unless you have a sacrificial secondary set of monitors to use, it's generally not a good idea to crank the monitors loud enough to generate natural feedback with the guitar. So I've relied on Softube's acoustic feedback plugin as a decent alternative. It's definitely not exact, but if you look at it as more of an effect, approximating one of those EBO devices, there's definitely a lot of utility and character in this little plugin. It can get a bit out of control in the extreme ends, but I love the way this adds character and movement to what would otherwise be boring sustained notes, with just a little vibrato. This is track 9, Turn a Phrase Reprise. There are these little lead bits in what you might call a chorus part, or just the part between the verses, really. Initially, I was trying to use some compression and delay tricks to add interest here, but nothing adds character like this feedback plugin. Because I've got the feedback cranked up, I'm using automation to turn it on right where I want it. But listen to the way it adds these rich harmonics to that sustained guitar note. Denise makes some fantastic spatial effects, among others, but I find myself using the Perfect Room reverb more than anything else. It has all the standard controls you'd expect, but compared to other reverb plugins, there's just more of everything here. The included shimmer and detune controls are nice, but I really appreciate the addition of a ducking function. It saves me from having to wire up a sidechain compressor or draw out a bunch of automation. Overall, it's just a better sounding reverb than what I use most of the time, and it has a character of its own which really helps make things sound less boring. Anytime I can get a plugin that plays like an instrument itself, I'm in. This is track 4, When You're Alone. It's one of the moodier tracks on the album, featuring an electric piano on the verse, but we leaned into that moodiness by adding a lush reverb courtesy of their Perfect Room plugin. I have it wired up as a send effect on bus 8, so the mix is set at 100%, but I'm also using that ducking feature to cut the reverb a bit while the vocal is active, and then swell back up to fill the space between the phrases.
More comfortable. What you wear when you're alone. More layers covering bone when you're most vulnerable. I am not angry. I am not amused. And people often enjoy being abused. Did you focus too long?
Last on my list is the XLN RC20 Retro Color. This is a one-stop shop for noise and distortion of all flavors. There are several different modules, some with a few different noise engines, and they all sound pretty good depending on your objective. On this last record, I used it to add some simulated vinyl noise and dynamic variation in the mastering stage. But in the past, I've used it for more targeted single-track stuff like adding instant lo-fi to your drum track during a pre-chorus. With the wobble and tape effects, it's a lot more interesting to the ear than just tweaking EQ and adding a little distortion. I'm back in my mastering project, and in the middle of the album, we have this intermission of sorts, a quieter song called Turn a Phrase.
People love to say you'll regret the thing.
I'm using the Retro Color plugin to add vinyl hiss and wobble. Nothing fancy. Some might call it cliche, but it sounds good, and we're happy with it.
Things you didn't do. Not the things you did. It's a lovely cliche.
So those are the 10 favorites coming out of this last mixing and mastering session. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy the album. It'll be on all the usual platforms January 1st, but it's currently available for pre-order on Bandcamp, and I'll leave a link in the description for that, along with each of these plugins. Please like and subscribe. I hope you have a great new year. I'm Ryan from Monster Logo Studios. Talk to you soon.